Hello and welcome to my Level 3 certification rocket build video. Currently, I am Level 2 certified with Tripoli Rocketry Association for high-powered rockets. And I'm going to embark on my Level 3 certification process. One of the things that you have to do to gain Level 3 certification is to document the building of your Level 3 rocket. And so I have chosen Madcow's Frenzy Massive rocket for my Level 3. And here are the directions. The specifications of the rocket are 122 inches in length, 5.5 inches in diameter, and weighs around 30 pounds. And here are the major components of the rocket. Here's the main body tube, and here's the nose cone with some of the other sections surrounding me. I also have 3 fins that look like this, and 3 fins that look like this. I have centering rings, and I have bulkheads, and in addition to that, I have 2 threaded rods. And perhaps the most important thing on the table would be the epoxy that I will be using. So I'm going to put together small little video segments of my entire build process and combine them all together so you can see what it's like to build a Level 3 certification rocket. Let's take a look at the parts that make up the rocket and how the parts will fit together. And we will start down here with the nose cone, which is followed by a small coupler. And you can see there that there will be a bulkhead installed at the bottom of it. And then we move into the smaller of the 2 body tubes. Then we move up to the larger of the 2 coupling tubes, which will eventually become the E-bay where the electronics will go. You can see on either end there will be bulkheads. You can also see 16-inch threaded rods that will go inside of the bulkhead, and you can see the bolts on the right hand side there. And then we move down to the larger body tube, and the larger body tube has the slits already constructed into the body tube so that the fins will fit into them. So this will be the basic layout of the fins. And if we go down here to the end, we come to the motor tube, and the motor tube will have these rings on them inside, and this will slide into the bottom of the main body tube. So that's all the different parts and how they will fit together. Okay, step number 1. Use the slotted main body tube to mark 3 evenly spaced marks around the shorter coupler tube. So let me mark this here, mark this here, and mark this here. Step number 2. Use a door jamb to mark the full length of the coupler. This will help later when marking other tubes. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the full length then. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. Alright, in this step, I'm going to be sanding both the top and the bottom of the small coupler tube, in addition to drilling holes and mounting the U-bolt into one of the bulkhead plates. Okay, So I'm on to the next step, and what I am doing is mixing up the epoxy, and I'm going to be putting this inside the short coupler tube to bond in the bulk plate that I have here. So I am going to start first by putting some of this onto the hardware that I have put in here. I'm going to put a good amount. Try to make sure it doesn't come through the hole, the vent hole that I've created. I'm going to have to go back and make sure that that vent hole doesn't get plugged up. Alright, I'm going to pour some more of this in here. Put it along the edge here so that it does a really good job of making a great bond between the bulk plate and the coupler tube. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mix up some more epoxy. And after I stir this up real good, I'm going to be using it now on the opposite side of the bulkhead that I just recently epoxied into the small coupler tube that will go near the nose cone. So this is what I did a little while ago. Epoxied that. And so now I'm going to epoxy, like I said, the top of it. So let me stir this up. Well, okay, and now I'm going to cup this. I'm going to spread it around the edges. I will say, having never used this epoxy before, it is taking a lot longer to dry than I imagined that it would. So I'm kind of moving it around, making sure that it gets along the edges and that the majority of the epoxy ends up sticking along the edges, because it's really not needed in the center section. But because it's so liquidy, and I am using the right ratio of the resin to the hardener, it's very liquidy, and so it's taking a good 20-25 minutes for it to dry. So this is what I do to make sure it stays along the edges. Okay, so now I'm mixing up some epoxy, and I'm putting in some West Systems 406 to thicken it up so that I can make a filler for around here, as instructed in the build instructions. So I'm still mixing this up. Looks like I need more. Yeah. It says to have the consistency of something like peanut butter or syrup. And so getting there. I might add just a little bit more. I've noticed, and as I've mentioned before, this epoxy mix is very liquidy. And so it's quite difficult to get it in the places you want it to be. But this definitely thickens it up. Alright, so I'm thinking that's somewhere between peanut butter and syrup. So let me go ahead and start. Let me go ahead and maybe bend this a little bit and see how I can get this done. Alright. Looks like I should have plenty. That's not going to be an issue. Turn this around here. Yeah, I think this is going to work pretty good. Go ahead and get the rest of this out of here. Looks like it's just about the right amount. And basically I followed the directions with one full pump on the resin and one full pump of the finisher. And so looks like it created the right amount that I needed for this job. Okay, now that I have it all out, let me go ahead and fill it in. Of course, this is for the structural integrity of the rocket, as it will be under significant speed, velocity, and pressure during launch. All right, I'm thinking that looks pretty good. I'll let that sit and dry. Okay, so in this step, I will epoxy this coupler that I worked on earlier into the bottom of the nose cone. And so I am using West Systems 105 epoxy resin along with the 205 fast hardener. And I've already prepared the mixture and I'm continuing to stir it up. And I believe it's just about ready. So the directions say to spread the epoxy inside of the nose cone. So that's what I'm going to do at this time. Go ahead and let's see, how should I do this? Maybe I'll do it like this. So just spread the epoxy all around inside. The directions say to make sure that you do a very thorough job of getting the inside, because you want a good bond. So that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, see if I can use up all of the epoxy that I prepared. I don't think I can put too much. I'm going to go ahead and use it all. You can see that it's still loose enough so that when I put it up at the top, it's coming down. But I think this is going to be a very good bond between these two. Let's spread this around. And then it is time to put the nose cone in. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. It says to leave at least 5.5 inches between the bottom of the coupler and the bottom of the nose cone, leaving at least 5.5 inches, and that's the 5.5 inch line. So looks like it's good to go. So now it's time to do some drilling, and I need to drill a 1/8 inch hole in this part of the payload tube for a vent. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, the next step is to drill holes for the shear pins. So I have the nose cone secured to the top payload section, and I have some tape here just to kind of keep it as tight as I can while I'm drilling. And I'm using a 5/64 inch drill. So let me go ahead and do the first one. All right, and I got 2 more to go. Okay, so in this step, I'm going to be mounting the switch band onto this coupler. So I've already mixed up the epoxy, and so I'm going to be spreading the epoxy on the coupler as stated in the directions, and then I will maneuver the switch band over it to ensure a nice secure bond. Just as a reminder, I'm using West Systems epoxy. I'm using their 105 epoxy resin along with the 205 hardener. Alrighty. I've already measured this out so that it's in the middle of this coupler, 6 inches on either side once it's mounted in the middle. Okay. Looking good. Go around one more time and use up all this epoxy. I'm sure that when I move the ring to its location here, that it's going to take and move the epoxy out, so I'm going to have to clean it up. So let me go ahead and move it over, and there we go, just as I thought it would be. Okay, so I'm going to take this napkin and clean it up. Okay, make sure it's in the right location there, and that's good. Alright, so in this step I need to drill 1/4-inch holes through the coupler, which is the E-bag, and this payload tube. And these holes are going to be used for the rivets here. So let me go ahead and drill the first one. You see here that I've got some tape. This is just kind of to roughly hold the coupler and the tube together. Alright, 1/4-inch hole. Alright, and then the directions say to put in the rivet before drilling the other holes. And so I'll go ahead and drill the other 2 holes now. Alright, so on to the next step. And in this step, I have made 2 marks on the motor tube. One is 1/2 inch from the end, and the other one, according to the directions, should be 7.5 inches from the end. And so I need to go ahead and epoxy these 2 centering rings onto the motor tube. So I have already mixed up my epoxy, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the one down here at the bottom. This is going to be a little challenging because the epoxy is a bit more liquidy than I would like it to be, but it is what it is. Alrighty. Okay. So I've got this side completed. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side and do this one. So the next step is to epoxy the motor tube into the main payload tube. So I have already epoxied 2 of the 3 centering rings onto the motor tube, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting epoxy inside the payload tube here, right above the slot where the fins go in, and that will align with this ring once it's inserted. And then I'm going to be putting epoxy right around here on the inside, which will help to hold this centering ring at the top. Once I get the epoxy in and I insert the motor tube, I will then be taking the 3rd ring and gently placing it around the end of the motor tube while it is inside here at the bottom of the payload tube to keep it straight while it's drying. And then I will remove it, and in a later step I will epoxy this onto the motor tube. So it's going to be a little challenging to get the epoxy way up inside here where it needs to be, here and here, without dripping it all the way down, and hopefully not getting any in the slits where the fins go, because that will cause problems in the future. So yeah, I look forward to doing this. You will also notice here that I have covered this end of the motor tube, and what I'm going to do is, once I get this up in there to the best of my ability, I'm going to then stand up the entire payload tube like this, and this is going to be inside there like this. And then my plan is to pour some epoxy inside so that it will accumulate here and will help to form a fillet and a good tight bond between the motor tube and the payload tube. So that's the hope. The next step, and this step, is tack gluing the fins onto the main body tube. And so I have mixed up some JB Weld epoxy, and I'm going to remove that fin, and I'm going to start with this one, and the directions say to put glue on the root of the fin, and so that's what I'm going to do. Try not to make too much of a mess here. Looks like I've gotten it all over the root. And so now I'm going to insert it, or correctly and all the way in. And I'm going to verify that it's sitting flat on the motor tube, and it is. Let me go ahead and do the same thing to the upper fin. Okay, got it all along the fin root. And slide it in. Make sure that it's completely flat inside. It is flat against the motor tube. And so now the directions call for putting a piece of wood along the top of the fins to make sure that they will remain dry, remain straight as they are drying. Verify yet again. Both fins are sitting flat on the motor tube. And let me see if I need to remove any epoxy that came up. Not too bad. It's looking pretty good. Alright, and then it says to make sure that the third and last centering ring is installed, not permanently but temporarily, so that when the fins are drying they're not inadvertently messing with the stabilization and straightness of the motor tube. Alright, so we're there. I'm going to go ahead and let this dry, and I'm going to install the other two pairs probably the next 2 consecutive days. Alright, so in this step the objective is to epoxy the fins inside the main body tube here and between the motor tube inside. And so I've mixed up the epoxy to the appropriate consistency, and so the objective will be to pour this down in there along where the fins meet the motor tube, and then I have a brush that I'm going to use to make sure that I don't miss any of the spots. This is a bit tricky, but it's important that this is done properly, because this could be one of the major places where there's failure due to inappropriate assembly of the rocket. There is a lot of stress that's put on the rocket with the thrust, and so these fins need to be very well attached. And so the problem is, because this is such a tight area to work in. It's really hard to see down in there. And addition to work down in there. So I will just keep pouring. I would rather put too much than not enough. So that's what I will continue doing for this part of the assembly. I am now on to step number 8,462. Oh, no, I mean step number 25 according to the directions. And so I have mixed up some epoxy, and in this step I'm going to be creating fillets for the fins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread some epoxy along the back, and then I'm going to come back in with the brush there and try to clean it up and make it look nice. My ultimate objective here is not to make this look as pretty as I can, though I certainly would like this to look really nice. My main objective is to create the best bond that I can between the fin and the main body tube, because as I've mentioned before in the video, one of the major problems experienced in high power rocketry is fin separation. And I would prefer to have a rocket that doesn't look 100% awesome and that doesn't fall apart than one that looks really awesome but the fins separate at some point during flight. So I'm going to opt for a little messy but a super great bond. Alright, so I've done these two here, and I will continue with these and finish them up and see you on a future video. Alright, so what I'm going to do now will be a few steps. One will be drilling a 1/8 of an inch vent in the main body tube, and I'm going to be doing that right here, followed by drilling 2 holes for the 2 rail buttons that I will be affixing to the rocket. And I'm going to be drilling a hole down here near the very bottom for one of the rail buttons, and then I'm going to drill another one here just forward of the center of gravity. After I drill the vent hole and drill the holes for the rail buttons and I install them, Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sand the entire outside of the body of the rocket in preparation for the primer coat of paint. So let me go ahead and drill the vent hole that I mentioned. Might be better for me to lay this down and try this. Should go a lot smoother. Okay, and again I'm going to drill the other 2 holes for the rail buttons, install them, and do sanding. Okay, so now I'm going to be installing the aft centering ring here. And so what I'm going to do before installing it is I'm going to mount the bottom of the motor retainer to the centering ring by drilling holes and then taking these screws and attaching the bottom of the retainer to the centering ring. And then once it's attached, then I will go ahead and epoxy it in to the bottom of the rocket. So I'm going to go ahead and continue drilling holes and go from there. Now I'm to the step of painting the rocket, and so I'm going to put on a primer coat, and this happens to be gray, and then after it dries I will put on the actual paint colors. Going to apply the final coat of color paint. Start with the nose. Okay, and I'll finish up painting it. Alright, so now it's time to put the electronics in the eBay. And so I'm going to be using 3 electronics in this rocket for my level 3 certification. I'm going to be using a featherweight GPS tracking system, which I successfully used about a month ago in my Apogee Rockets Katana, and it worked absolutely wonderfully. I'm also going to be using an RRC3 altimeter along with my Entacore altimeter that I also used last month when flying my katana, and so I'm definitely using this one. I'm taking it out of the eBay for the katana rocket because I know it works, and so this will be my primary altimeter, and the RRC3 will be used as my backup altimeter. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be mounting my charge wells onto the outside of the upper and lower part of the eBay, 2 on each side. Once I've completed doing that, I will be using the mounting post to mount these 3 electronics. I have terminal blocks here that I will be mounting also on the outside of the eBay for my wiring that comes from the 2 altimeters out to the outside of the eBays, and so I will be using those. I've got my 22 gauge wire that I will be wiring up the altimeters. Got a couple switches here to turn the altimeters on and off, and I also will be using a couple mini clamps to avoid the problems of trying to get into the eBay without an easy way of separating them, so I can completely remove the sled that will be inside the eBay from one end and being able to work on the electronics as needed. So yep, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and start this and see how it works out. So I have mounted the RR3C altimeter and the featherweight GPS tracker to the sled. And so now I am going to transfer my Intercore AIM dual deployment altimeter from an old Rocket eBay over to this sled, and I'm going to mount it here. At that point I'm going to go ahead and start doing the wiring, and so I will be back with you a little bit later to show you how it goes. So I have finished up mounting the 2 altimeters, the RRC3 and the Intercore dual deployment. The RRC3 is here, the Intercore is here, and then this is the featherweight GPS tracker. So as you can see here, I've got everything mounted. I have run all of the 24 gauge wire, and down here below I have the batteries and the switches, which I'll be doing some final touches on before everything is completely done. Over here at this end I've got connectors so that it will be very easy for me to pull the sled in and out of the eBay. So I still need to connect one here and then the wires. So I'm going to be, at this point, I'm going to be inserting the sled into the eBay, and these wires here will be coming out this side. One set of wires for the main will be going through this terminal block into here for the ejection charge, and then the other from the other altimeter will come into this terminal block and into here. And then of course on the other end of the eBay I've got exactly the same thing, so I'll be running those wires and finishing this all up. So that's a quick update of that. Here are the fire initiator wires that I will be using for my ejection charges. So I've done some, I've run some tests on the altimeters and they are working. I've used the Encore before, so I'm very familiar with it. The GPS, the featherweight, I've used before, so I feel very comfortable with that. The only thing that I'm using new on this one is the RRC3, but I've heard a lot of great things about it, and so I'm feeling pretty good about the eBay at this time. So yeah. So now it's time to build the motor. I'm going to be using an Aerotech DMS M1350W for my level 3 attempt. So following the directions, I am to put the liner into the main body tube. I've got 4 grains, and I am to separate them with a small O-ring. So I will put the first one in. And I will follow that up with the other 3. Once I'm done with that and they're all in, I will be taking this and inserting it here. And once it's flush, I'll be taking the larger O-ring, inserting it tightly around the connection. I will be mixing up the epoxy and sealing this end of the motor. And it's supposed to be sitting at least 24 hours before use, and that's not a problem because I won't be using it for a while. Alright, so that's the motor assembly. So, after a lot of work, I'm finishing up my rocket. Again, it is a Madcow Massive Frenzy. Quick overview, I've got my rail buttons here secured. Got the eBay. Got some finishing up to do with just bringing the wire through and hooking up the initiators. This is going right in here, like that. Nose cone, body tube, got a vent here. I've got my nylon shear pins that I will be using in 3 different locations to hold the nose cone on. And once the drogue initiator wire is fired off, it should be separating the cone for the main parachute, and of course the drogue parachute will be in here. So overall I'm pretty happy with it. Did a lot of detail on the paint, and got my NASA stickers on here, of course. Big fan of NASA. So yeah, just got a few more things that I need to do some testing, and hopefully I will be launching this with my M motor for my level 3 certification very soon. So wish me luck.